This particular recording is for the NET-101 class. I'm covering routing switching essentials. Basically, each week I'm going to add a more complex element that will ultimately have to be performed on the final exam for the course. And so today I'm going over one of the more complicated things to understand, which is how to configure switch VLANs. And so we're going to be going over that, and this is the one of the packet tracers that you're required to do. So I'm going to go through that very carefully and outline some of the basic ideas. So this particular one requires us to take this topology that you see here and basically complete an addressing table. I'll go and open up that instructions right here. So this is the particular instructions. As you'll notice, switch 1, 2, and 3 have been, they want to put those switches, create a VLAN called 88. This is actually going to be the management VLAN. And the reason why I say management VLAN is because it wants to put these guys all in the same subnet and give them IP addresses, and those would be the IP addresses we would use to manage those switches. And then, of course, PC 1 through 6 will they'll be in different subnets, and those subnets will be programmed to be in a VLAN, such as sales, production, marketing, and then we'll, of course, have our management VLAN as you see here. The real trick to this design is to understand that, in fact, if you look at this, you'll see that PC1, PC2, and PC3, PC4, PC5, PC6, they're all connected as either switch 2 or switch 3. So the idea is, if you look at this little addressing table, I want PC1 to be in the same subnet as PC4. So I want PC1 and PC4 to be in the same broadcast domain, but I want PC2 and PC5, for example, to be in a different broadcast domain, and PC3 and PC6 to be in a completely separate broadcast domain. What you've been used to up to this point is all machines connected to the same switch or in the same broadcast domain. But you can actually create virtual LANs, and you can separate broadcast domains on these switches. So I can put PC1, PC2, and PC3 each in their own separate broadcast domain. And I can also then have PC1, PC2, and PC3 not only in their own virtual domains and in their own or virtual LANs and in their own broadcast domains, but I can have those broadcast domains span these switches. So as you look over here, PC1 and in this case PC4, they can be in the same VLAN even though it spans multiple switches. And this requires understanding how to configure the switches properly. So I'm going to walk you through the steps on how to do that. And as we go, I will explain it. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So switch 1 and switch 2 have been fully configured already in this example. In fact, I think if I go to these, you will not be able to see the config. Yeah, it's been locked in this particular examination. So you're not able to see the other configs because that would be cheating, because you could basically duplicate the config of switch 2 on switch 3 and it would work. So instead, we're going to go to switch 3 and we're going to program switch 3 properly by going to the command line interface. So we're going to go through the basic steps first by configuring the management VLAN. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the instructions which say that we have to go and configure the VLANs properly and assign the addresses. So first off, I'm going to type enable and I'm going to do show run to show my running config. And I just want to show you as I scan through this is a completely blank configuration, other than the fact that the host name has been set to S3. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create a VLAN called VLAN 88, because that's what it required. So I'm going to go to config terminal, and I'm going to type interface VLAN 88. And this is acting as my management VLAN. And I'm going to configure the IP address for switch 3, which is the switch I'm on now, and the appropriate default gateway. And looking at my instructions, I'm going to type an IP address. In this case, it wanted 172.31.88.4. And the subnet mask was 255.255.255.0. And the gateway, I'm not going to put in there right now, but that's the IP address and the subnet mask. On a switch, you do not configure the gateway on the VLAN interface. You configure it as a global command, and I'll show you that in a minute. But I'm going to hit enter, and that sets the IP address for interface VLAN 88. Now, this interface is down by default, so I'm going to bring it up. So I'm going to type no shutdown, and that brings this interface up, and VLAN 88 is now up. I'm now going to hit Control Z to exit out, and now that I've hit Control Z, I'm back at the command. If I do show run now, you will see that there's my interface VLAN 88, and there's my IP address right there set up correctly, as you can see. Now I'm ready to set the default gateway for this switch. So you're going to type config T, and that's going to bring us to the configuration mode, and we're now ready to set up the default gateway. The default gateway is really easy to set. Basically, we're going to type IP, and now just in case you don't remember, you can always type question mark if you forget, especially like if you're doing this in the field or on the test, and you can't remember the command. You simply type IP question mark. As you can see, I can type default gateway, and now I can type in the IP address of the default gateway. And so in this case, it wanted 172.31.88.1, and I'm going to hit enter. And now that sets the default gateway for this configuration. So I'm going to hit Control Z again, and that brings me back. If I do show run, and I scan through here, you will see now I've set my IP default gateway command. So now I've done the first requirements in the instructions, which were to set up the IP address, the subnet mask, and the default gateway. And I did that correctly. Now I want to go ahead and create and name and assign the appropriate VLANs for this configuration. And there were several VLANs, if you remember. So on a switch, in order to configure the VLANs, you go to config. Actually, I'm sorry about that. VLANs are not a configuration terminal command, which is confusing. VLANs are actually stored in a separate database file. They're not actually stored in the running configuration. As opposed to most commands, which are stored in the running configuration, these commands are stored in the VLAN database. So in most commands you would do in running config, in this particular one, you'll type VLAN database. And that brings us into VLAN configuration mode. And here's where we can set our VLAN numbers. So remember, we had a VLAN 10, a VLAN 20, a VLAN 30, and a VLAN 88, and a VLAN 99. So we're going to type VLAN 10, and now I'm in VLAN 10, and VLAN 10 has been added. Now, the real question is, if you type question mark after VLAN 10, you'll notice that you can type in the name of the VLAN. So when you type VLAN 10 space, you can type the name. In this case, this VLAN was called sales. Uh-oh. You actually have to type the keyword name before you actually type the name. But see how I did that? I made a mistake. No big deal. I simply retyped it again, and I put in the keyword, and now I'm good. So I'm going to repeat this process now for VLAN 20, which is my production VLAN. So I'm going to type VLAN 20 name production. And now I've added VLAN 20 with the name production. Now I'm ready to add the marketing VLAN, VLAN 30 name marketing. See that? Now I'm going to add my management VLAN, VLAN 88 name management. And now VLAN 88 has been created officially, and VLAN 88 is now up. Now, before you configure a VLAN interface, it's probably a good idea to first create the VLAN. And in this case, what I did is I created the interface first, then I created the VLAN. That's why it's now gone up, because it's noticed that it's had an interface created for it, and that interface has been set to no shutdown, which is why it suddenly came up. So now VLAN, I want to create VLAN 99, and the name will be called native. There you go. Now I've created all of my VLANs. All the VLANs are now created. And that's pretty easy thing to do, creating the VLANs. Now we're ready to move on with assigning the native VLAN 99. And it wants us to make this our trunk port. So on our switch, and in fact I have to go back to your diagram so that you can see this. But on our switch here, you'll notice that there's a port. In fact, hopefully you can see that right now. G1, meaning module, /2, meaning port 2. So G1/2 is currently connected to my other switch. And if I hover my mouse on this, I'll get a little pop-up here. There you go. GLAN Ethernet 1/2 is up, and it's connected to switch 1. And whenever you connect two switches together, they automatically become trunk ports. Now, sometimes it's a good idea to set those as trunk ports, but Cisco automatically makes them trunks. Trunks are very special because trunks allow for the tagging of VLAN data to go in between them. So we are going to now go to that port, and we are going to set up the native VLAN port on that trunk. Okay? So how do you do that? Well, it's very easy. We're going to exit out of VLAN database mode, which we did. And now we're going to go to config T. And now in config T, I'm going to type interface G1/2. And that is the interface that is my trunk port. Now I need to set this manually to be a trunk port. So I'm going to type switch port trunk native, because I want to set this A to be a trunk port, and then B, I want to set what the native VLAN is for the trunk. And so the native VLAN is going to be VLAN 99. All right. So that basically sets up VLAN 99 as being the native port. Notice that VLAN 1 was the native port by default. And so what it did is it removed VLAN 1 as the native port, and it made VLAN 99 as the native port. Now VLAN 99 is not part of the trunking labels that occur. So when you send data across this port, it will tag what VLAN that data is intended for in the frame that goes across, except for VLAN 99. So I've basically said VLAN 99 will not be tagged, whereas other VLANs will be tagged. And so that's what's happened here. I've basically set VLAN 99 is to be the one that is native for this port. So that's basically how you go. Now, I also want to do switch port mode, right? I want to set the mode of the port to trunk. And basically what that's going to do is this is going to take the port down, set it to trunking mode, and bring it back up. And that's basically what happened here. It took it down, set it to trunking mode, brought it back up. And so basically what has happened now is I went from an auto-negotiated trunking mode to a forced trunking mode. So this port is now forced to be in trunking mode. Okay? Another thing that people oftentimes will do switch port no negotiate. Basically, you do not want your switch ports auto negotiating any settings. So we're basically setting it up. You know what? This is a trunk port. It's pretty important to make this always a trunk, never not a trunk. So I'm setting this, you know what, don't negotiate any parameters, speed, connectivity, or anything like that. I want this to be a no negotiate port, meaning that it's only going to use the manual settings that I've provided. Okay? There you go. So that's pretty much how you set your trunk port to work. Now, another command that you'll oftentimes want to do on a switch port is let the switch port know, especially the trunk port, which VLANs are allowed to go across this trunk. Now, this is where you would probably want to label all of your VLANs that you have created on this switch. So I'm going to type switch port trunk allowed, and I'm going to type VLAN, and I'm going to type in, followed by a comma, each VLAN that I want to allow across this port. So in this case, I had 10, 20, 30, 88, and I want to allow my native port as well. So I've got my sales, my production, and I've got my management, I've got my native port, all those are available. So I'm going to hit enter. That is going to allow those VLANs to transit across this trunk. That's basically how you set up your trunk ports on your switch. I'm going to hit Control Z, and I've made enough changes to this point where I would like to save my changes by running copy run start. There you go. That's basically how you assign the native VLAN. That's how you disable dynamic trunking protocol. You do not want it to negotiate. That's the no negotiate. You've restricted the trunk port to only specifically allow certain VLANs, which is what we just did. And we've set the native VLAN to be VLAN 99. We did all of that with those commands. The next thing the instructions want us to do is they would like us to configure basic security on the switch. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to type config T, and I'm going to type enable secret because I want to put the encrypted password. Whenever they ask for the encrypted password, you want to type enable secret, and the password is it's a secret. So the enable secret password is it's a secret. So I've now set the enable secret mode password. It also wants me to set a console password. The console password is set with line con 0. And I'm going to basically type password let me in. And I'm going to go ahead and set that to login, meaning it will allow logons now. It wants me to set the VTY password. So I'm going to type line VTY. You might want to exit line mode, and then I'm going to do line VTY. And the reason I do that is so I can see how many line numbers I have, just in case you forget. Remember, the switch is 015, not 05 like it is on the router. Now I'm configuring all 16 lines all at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and type password, and I'm going to type C1 $C0, and then I'm going to type login, which basically says allow logins to occur on this port. There you go. That's basically how you configure the passwords on the switch. It's a very good idea. In fact, I'll just show you. When I go to here and I type show run, you will see that the passwords on the console and on the telnet ports are in plain text. So it's probably a good idea to make those non-plain text. So I'm going to do config T, and I'm going to type service, and I forget what to do, so I'm going to hit question mark, and I'm going to do service password encryption, and that will automatically set the command, the passwords to now be encrypted. If I do show run, you'll now see that those passwords, as you can see now, are now encrypted, so they can't be seen easily in the running config. There, that's pretty much how you set the passwords. It also wants to set a banner, so we're going to do config T, and the banners are really easy to do. You type banner, MOTD, with some character, and then you're going to type in the command they want. In this case, they want authorized access only, just like that. Now I put my end character. I end with the same $sign, and I hit enter. And that goes ahead and opens up and creates a banner on this configuration. There you go. I'm going to show run, and I'm just going to make sure that everything's in there correctly. And if you scroll through here, you will see your banner just like that. There's your banner. Okay. The other thing it wants you to do is disable your unused ports. Now this can be a little bit difficult if you've never done it before. So we do want to talk about how to disable those ports. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. But let's go ahead and first, before I want to disable ports, I want to make sure I understand exactly what ports I'm using before I start disabling ports. So let's go ahead and take a look at what ports we're using. And we got to make sure we make note of these. So we're using the G12, that's our trunk port. We do not want to disable that port. We've got our F011 port, our F018 port, and our F06 port. All other ports can be disabled, right? So this is where it gets kind of fun. We can disable all the ports in this port, but first let's do show interfaces. And oops, I accidentally did a question mark. So this shows you all of your interfaces. And I got fast Ethernet 01, 02, 03, and it keeps going on. You got all your interfaces listed all in a row. Another way to see a good way to look at all your interfaces is to go to config T. Oh no, I'm sorry. Just do show run, and you can see them all listed here. See interface fast Ethernet 01 all the way through 24, and I've got my gigabit interfaces, and I got my VLANs. So there you go. So if I wanted to disable all the unused ports, I'm basically going to set them all into shutdown mode. So this is how you do it. You go to config T, and you're going to type interface range. And here's where you're going to type in a range of interfaces, right? So you got to know the shortcuts for the interface commands. The shortcut for fast Ethernet is FA 0 for fast Ethernet module 0 / 1 through 5. So I'm going to disable 1 through 5, comma, I'm not going to disable 6. I want 6 to be enabled because that one is connected to one of my machines. Then I'm going to do FA 0 / 7 through 10. Okay, comma. Then I'm going to skip 11 because 11 is connected to one of my machines. FA 0 / 12 through 17. I don't want to do 18 because that's connected to one of my machines. So I'm going to do FA 0 / 19 through 24, comma, and I want to disable my gigabit Ethernet port 1 / 1. So I'm going to type G1 / 1. Hit enter. Now if you did it correctly, you'll get the config interface range option in your command prompt. I can now type shutdown, and it will go ahead and shut down all of those interfaces all at once. And notice it did that for me. Boy, that was a lot easier than going to each individual interface. So now I'm going to hit Control Z. I've done a lot of work. I'm going to type copy, run, start. If you want to do show run now, you can see that all those interfaces that are being unused are shut down. Notice that interface fast Ethernet 06 is still up, which is exactly the way we wanted it to be. Interface 11 is still up. And then notice the gigabit Ethernet 1 / 1 is down, but 1 / 2 is up, just the way we want it. All right? So we were able to now disable all of those configurations. all those interfaces. The next thing it wants us to do is configure port security on fastethernet 06. So port security is pretty fun. It allows us to really secure this switch, which says we do not want foreign machines connecting to the switch and using it inappropriately. So we would like to secure this switch port down, and this particular one it wants us to lock down is port 6. So there's a couple of features it wants us to enable. I'm going to go ahead and do them here slowly and show you how that works. All right, so I'm going to go to interface FA0/6, and I'm now configuring interface fast Ethernet module 0 interface 6. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to type, first off, I'm going to turn on port security. So the way you do it is you type switch port-security, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay. One of my problems though is this is a dynamic port. So it's basically saying that I can't do that. So I need to make it non-dynamic. So let me see how to do that. So we're going to go. So one thing you can do is you can do question mark. So you can do switch port. Okay, and here's where we can set it to mode. And notice you have access, dynamic, or trunk. It does not let you do port security when it's in dynamic mode. The reason why is because it could become a trunk port. If it became a trunk port, port security would really mess things up. So we have to make this an access mode port in order to set up security. So the first command is do switch port mode access. Now this is an access port, and now I can set switch port security. So I'm going to do switch port-security. Right? Pretty easy to do. Now, a couple of commands the instructions want us to do a couple of things. First off, it wants to only allow up to 2 devices to connect to this port. So if somebody were to plug a hub or a switch into this port, and then they tried to connect 10 or 15 machines to it, that wouldn't be possible, because we are going to put in a command like this, and I'll show you. We're going to type switch port security, and then we're going to say maximum, and the maximum is 2. That's going to only allow 2 max to connect on this port. The next thing it wants to do is the first machines that connect to this switch port will be the ones that are the only ones allowed to connect to it from that point on. And if we wanted to do that, we need to do this command called MAC address sticky, which says it's going to learn the MAC of the first machine to plug into the port, and that machine, that computer, will be the only one from that point on that can connect to it, because it'll learn the MAC. So to do MAC address sticky, you type switch port security MAC address sticky. Now this command will say I'm going to listen on this port, and the first machines that connect in, I'm going to learn their MACs, and they will be the only MACs allowed to communicate on this port. Okay. Now, next thing we want to do is if there is a violation, if there's a violation on the port, right? So basically, if somebody tries to connect to this port illegally, then we want to note that there has been a violation so that we know about it in the future, that we know that there was a violation. We do not want to disable the port. So in order to do that, we would type switch port security, and then we'll type violation. Oops, I got to spell it right. And if I do question mark, you'll see there's protect, restrict, and shutdown. If you do shutdown, if it sees a violation, it'll shut the port down, and then port doesn't work until you turn it back on. If you say restrict, it's going to announce to you that a violation is happened. So we're going to type restrict. And there you go. That's switch port security violation restrict. So that's the particular command. I'm going to hit Control Z to exit out, and I'm going to type copy run start to save my changes because I've made a lot of changes and I don't want to lose them. All right. So we've configured basic security. We've configured port security on F06. We've basically set up the native VLAN. We've added our VLAN trunks. We've done all of these things. So now, the one thing we haven't done is we haven't assigned our ports that are currently available, the ports that we're using, we haven't signed them to the correct VLANs. So we are going to now do that. We're going to assign them to the appropriate VLANs. So we know that VLAN 7, we know that interface 7, these machines need to be in their various VLANs. So we have to go in and figure out what ports belong in what VLAN and assign them appropriately. So that's basically what we have to do. Now this is real easy to do because the way the configuration works, oops, I messed up my, hold on just a minute here. There we go. The way this configuration works is ports 0 through, actually 7 through 12 are in VLAN 12, or in VLAN 10. Ports 13 through 20 are in VLAN 20. Ports 1 through 6 are in VLAN 30. So that's basically how they've configured it. So I'm going to show you how to do it the way that they want you to do it using interface ranges. So I've got a range of ports I would like to assign to a VLAN. So I'm going to do interface, and I'm going to assign VLAN 10 out first. Interface range, and I'm going to do ports 7 through 12. So FA0/7 through 12. I should now get my config interface range command, which I do. And now I'm going to set these all not to dynamic. Switch port mode access. These are all now in access mode. They're not dynamic. They're not trunk. And now I'm going to assign them to be manually placed into VLAN 10. So switch port access, VLAN 10. And that's going to assign all of these ports to VLAN 10. All right? Now I'm ready to assign VLAN 20's ports. And those ports are 13 through 20. So I'm going to type, it's a good idea to exit out of your range so you know you're not configuring the wrong range. And then what you're going to type is interface range, right? FA 0/13 through 20. And now I'm going to type switch port. And I'm going to use my up arrows to go to my last command. Switch port mode access. That sets ports 13 through 20 to be in access mode. And now I'm going to set switch port access VLAN, and these are all going to be in VLAN 20. So now I've set ports 13 through 20 all to be in VLAN 20. Now I'm ready to exit out of my interface range, and I'm going to do another interface range. Interface range FA 0/1 through 6, and I'm going to set this to switch port mode access. Right? And now I'm going to configure all of these to be in VLAN, you guessed it, VLAN 30. So now I've configured all of my ports to be in different VLANs. It's kind of important to see what this looks like when you're done. So I'm going to go to Control Z, copy, run, start, and I'm going to do a show run so you can see what the result is of all your commands. Notice that all of these ports, we'll look at port 6, VLAN 30, and you can see all the commands there, right? So notice all these VLANs have been assigned to a VLAN. Most of them are shut down, but like there, interface 11, it's been assigned to VLAN 10, and it's switch port mode access. So it's a good idea to see the results of what you did, just so you can understand how the commands work, because sometimes those interface ranges are difficult to understand. All right. So now we have assigned all the appropriate VLANs. Now, if everything is working perfectly, that will mean that this switch right here is now sending VLAN tag data back and forth between the switches. So ideally, these PCs should be able to talk to each other across the switch ports. That's the ideal configuration, if it all works correctly. Let's go ahead and take a look at our results of our activity. I think this is the right one. And let's see if we did okay on it. That is the wrong one, by the way. Dumb me had more than one packet tracer open. All right, so let's go back. Let's do it right this time. So I'm going to open up this packet tracer, this activity file. I'm going to click check results. And notice that everything is done completed and correct. Right? Very good. Now, ideally then, PC, and I'm going to just pick on PC1 and PC4. PC1 is 172.31.10.21, and so I'm going to look at PC1. I'm going to go to, it's not letting me do it. Well, let me go to the desktop tab. All right, it will. So I'm going to open up a command prompt, and I'm going to type ipconfig. And there I am, 172.31.10.21. Now, let's take a look at what my counterpart, 10.24, is the IP address for PC4. So I'm going to ping 172. Oops, darn it. That was a bad mistake. I'm going to ping 172.31.10.24 and see if I can ping across those VLANs. See if it by chance works. That would be nice if it did. First packet times out due to an ARP request. Let's see if we continue to time out. We're continuing to time out. This is not a good sign. Yeah, we timed out. We got to figure out why that's the case. Probably due to this switch having an issue. So let's show interface G1/2. I show that it's up and working correctly. So we're going to go to config T, interface G1/2. I'm going to shut that interface down, and then I'm going to bring it up. Let it establish that trunk. We have to wait for spanning tree to re-enable the ports. Oh, they're back up. Spanning tree reconnected the ports. Looks like we had a problem on the auto negotiation of that port when we disabled it. Now it's back up and running, which is good. So I'm going to go back to PC1 now, go to command prompt, and I'm going to try to re-ping 170 the machine across the line. There we go. Now notice that PC1 and PC4 are now in the same broadcast domain, and PC1 and PC4 are pinging each other through the VLAN across these three switches and maintaining the same broadcast domain. PC2 should be able to ping PC5, and PC3 should be able to ping PC4, PC6 with no problem. There you go. We did it. Exciting, isn't it? So we've now configured the switch VLAN configuration properly.